Okay, let's see what we can do with a few stamps for a winter scene utilizing the pigment ink and dye-based ink fusion impressions idea. And if you don't know what I'm talking about a recent kind of test lesson and card, whatever you want to call it, that I did a few weeks back, where I applied both pigment ink in the form of Brilliance ink with the re-inker fluid from a black dye-based pad together on the same impression and stamped it out. Now that's not going to come until later. We're going to get a nice foundation composition going just with dye-based inks right now. And the reason why I did this fusion impression is because sometimes areas of the scene become dark, and there's other areas that I leave in the scene that are light. But if I stamp an impression, an image across both of those areas, if it's in dark against the, a dark impression against a dark background won't show up very much. And where it's, if I do it in a light color, in the light areas of the background, you won't be able to see it, quite as distinctly. So I wanted to get an impression that would both have the potential of being kind of visually lifted from the background by this kind of oscillation of light and dark. So the image, that would be where the image is dark, I wanted that to be stamped in the lighter area of the scene, and where the scene gets dark, I wanted it to be light. So anyways, I tried that out and it looked pretty good. The results were a lot of fun, and I don't know, it's just I think it's a decent technique to investigate further, and just to see where it will go. So I'm still playing around with that idea. I really don't know where these scenes are going to go when I'm doing that type of experiment, so this, I don't know. I guess if it comes out it could be seen as a lesson, but it's kind of just more of an experiment on video that you're watching, and I really truly don't know what the results will be. I have a little bit of an idea of where I want it to go, but I try not to set up any kind of real definitive expectations of what I'm going after, and it's kind of more of a, I'll see when I get there type of approach. Okay, so we have this snowy brook right here, alright, and I plan on stamping some trees in the foreground here, and that's where we'll get our fusion impressions with the foreground trees in here, okay? So that being said, when I approach the coloring of this, kind of my foundation composition, I'm approaching it a little bit differently from a lot of the scenes that I do, in that a lot of the kind of emphasis will be on those fusion impressions, okay? So I'm not really very careful about my placement of ink right now, because I kind of overdo it a little bit, or a lot, in this type of, I don't know, foundation right here, because I want it to be dark enough, in other words, where when I stamp the trees in lighter tones, you'll be able to see them, because if it's not dark enough, we won't be able to see them. So anyways, okay, so I'm using some Memento light blue ink. I need a little bit of a re-inker here. My pad's really dry. That's the summer sky, okay. Alright. Coloring, and now, snow is a very, very reflective surface, being that it's made out of ice, so you can retain some of your lighter areas if you so choose. sometimes when it comes to the foundation of a snowy scene, you can kind of flip-flop, usually in other types of scenarios where you're dealing with soil and dirt and trees and all that type of stuff. I usually make the water lighter than the surrounding landscape. When it comes to snow, sometimes it's best to make that water, darker than the snow. It makes sense because snow, again, is so reflective. It's really reflecting a lot of that color back at you. So, all right. So that being said, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create kind of this bank of snow up here. I mean, I wasn't really going to bother, but I guess you could. You could take and you can just make a bank like this right here. It's going to be a snowy bank. I don't know if I could put some trees up there and it would really make sense to do so in any other type of situation. But I'm going to have those trees going up quite far, so I might just leave it blank in the background. But anyway, see what I'm doing? I'm just kind of creating that little hill in the background like so, matching it up with the kind of the horizon line. It's a very slight horizon line on this little church here. Alright, so again, going kind of dark here. Or, it's not going to be too dark, but it's certainly darker than what I would normally make it up there. And see, I'm just kind of toning out that entire church. Basically, I'm going to go back in to like that rooftop and add some snow on top of it using a gel pen, so... Again, kind of overdoing it a little bit. You don't have to be careful about it at all. We'll add in a lot of that snowy type of effects after. Okay, so that is, again, let me put a little bit more up there. That is the summer sky, and it's a really, really light blue ink, okay? So if you start applying really light inks, don't expect it to be dark, even if you put on a really, good slathering of it, big coating of it. An ink is only going to get as dark as the value of that hue is inherently, okay? Sometimes I get done with a card like this where I move through several different values of blue. And it only really gets into the darker tones, the darker values of that given color when I, get towards the end of the process. But sometimes if people have kind of in mind the end result, they might have seen a sample or something like that, and they start working on the process, sometimes they get kind of eager to really get to that level of finish, and they're just on the first color, so sometimes they rush it, and when you do that, sometimes you're not really kind of achieving the level of saturation using the existing inks that you're working with. So, and then the end result might come out a little bit more anemic, okay, but the good thing about that is you can kind of just go back in and reintroduce some of those lighter tones back into it, but really take your time and just make the process nice and gradual, and it's just so much more of a kind of an easy and very forgiving process when you're doing it that way, okay? You don't have to have brush technique or anything like that. I'm just kind of bringing this in, but see, I'm not doing it like this, where I'm getting these shapes everywhere. So you're just kind of, anywhere you're working, you just kind of stay in that area for a longer period of time, okay? Now this isn't going to take forever or anything like that. You can see the first color, really, I put down a pretty good application of it, okay? But see, everywhere I'm going, I'm just kind of adding several strokes down like that, and it's a very light touch, okay? And I've shown in a lot of my recent videos how you can just do this with a paper towel even. You can just wad up your paper towel, okay? These are really convenient Applicators called stylus tools, but they're not around anymore. Well, we still have some tips and everything like that, but you can just really apply your inks like this too, okay? And it applies very quickly. See, like I'm just going like that. It's almost like you're finger painting. It has a really good feel to it too, you know. I mean, surprisingly so, but it does work just fine. Okay, it's a little bit different. There's a little bit of texture to it. Sometimes you have to kind of use it for a couple colors, and it, I don't know, it kind of softens and kind of saturates your surface right there, your applicator surface with a lot of ink, and it just feels a little bit different. You know, the more you use it, it gets better and better. Okay, let's use this one here again. Using the Danube Blue, I'm kind of moving up into those darker tones right here. It's not a really dark blue by any means, even though it looks really navy, but something like that's probably like more of a, in its darkest incarnation, it's probably something like a 70% or something like that value. Meaning, there's 30% more to go before you achieve kind of true black. All right, so you can see, I mean, the first color, takes a little bit of time, but it pays dividends when you get into your darker tones, because those darker tones really apply nice and smoothly if you have kind of that foundation going, already going on your surface of your paper, because it's kind of lubricated and kind of super saturated the pulp of the paper with moisture. Okay, so take your time with each ink, each hue and value of hue in this case that you're using, okay? And when you do that, when you get to your current color, even if you use horrible technique and go like that, right? See how easy it spreads out? It's because the page is super saturated with the previous inks, okay? So it's completely forgiving, or it can be. Where it sticks is like, this is an example of just a dry paper that's very absorbent. If I go like that, that is hard set. And that's what, some people mention at times. I'm getting, the shape of the applicator, they say, okay? And that's when, this type of thing happens, okay? But if you do that on here, right, it really spreads out. And again, it's because it's super saturated. The more arid the climate you're in, now naturally your inks are going to dry faster. So what I recommend to people, and what I just did with someone that just recently purchased a lot of these stamps, and they're going to follow along, I always say, hey, the first thing that I always tell people is you use more ink than you usually do if you're going for this type of layered dye-based ink on glossy cardstock process here. It's always kind of a strange kind of notion, because everyone's used to doing coloring, okay? All right, now this is a Marvy blue. I thought that would introduce a little slightly brighter blue into the mix, even though it's very similar to the Bahama blue that I used from Memento. The Marvy one's a little bit brighter. Just use whatever blues you have, though. A really good one would be the Distress inks, like the Tumbled Glass and Blueprint Sketch. Well, that one's really, really dark. But you can use it maybe in your darker areas. Yeah, since I have them, why don't I use them? But anyways, yeah, going back to that, I always just tell people to use a lot more ink than kind of what they're accustomed to, because in all other forms of stamping and coloring, we're usually coloring in an area to completion, okay, and that's it. That's all that's kind of required of that. But in this one, you're kind of adding that color down, but you're also kind of prepping the surface for the next color to come, so you're adding a little bit more ink down than you normally would, just to get the moisture content established for the next color to come, which is always the darker color if you're kind of working it through a value scheme like this. Alright, but you can kind of see in here where I've established some lighter areas, meaning I've just, left them as is. I didn't tone them out. So a lot of times if people look at your end result, sometimes people have a question if you've done this technique before. You say, how do you get that light in there? Because they think that you've done some sort of subtractive process in order to achieve that light, instead of just merely retaining the lightness that existed when you started the scene, or when you started on the white piece of paper. Okay, again, adding this mask down again. Sometimes you have to do it a few times. And I like to kind of add some of it down like that and get that line. Then I kind of blend it in a little bit, and then I'll go back to another color. Sometimes if I just leave that mask down, it just creates such a harsh transition, where I like it a little bit more kind of graceful. So you'll see me kind of go over that transition many times during the entire process here. You don't have to color between the lines and whatnot, something like this. You don't have to worry about breaking out of the lines, I mean, there's no linear areas in here, but I'm just saying, in terms of general areas, just, you want kind of harmony, and you want things to blend in, so kind of being really super careful about your color placement. You can do that, I guess, but I happen to think that things come together a little bit more with a looser type of application. Sometimes that's harder, though, I mean, if people are really used to very particular types of coloring where you're really staying within borders, okay? Where there's a really definitive area to color in, and then another area to color a different color, with a a line down the middle. But what you'll find is that in doing this type of kind of process right here, it's not hard to get used to it. And I know that people are saying, some people are saying, well, it's easy for you, but I taught this class a lot of times, and people after their first card or whatever, first process of doing this, it really opens up for them if they haven't done that type of process before. So don't really worry about it. Just try to get, if you want it, just a real general thing, you can just kind of create this vignette, where it's kind of darker on the perimeter and lighter in the middle. And you can kind of think of it that way. And then what you do is you go back into the scene, and you can see where there's areas in the design itself that are darker, and you can just go back in and color those in, which is essentially what I'm doing here. I can see that there's some darker areas, like right along that little ridge there, see that? In the snow. And what you're doing is you're just reiterating what's on the design itself, okay? So see that? Right there. This rock is darker, so I'm going in and just adding some tone into the rock. Okay? You can see this creek right in here is dark, so I'll go back in and I'll just add in some more tone in there. But it could be just started off with this general kind of notion of a darker perimeter and lighter in the middle, and then just go in and tone in your darker elements, okay? And just look at the design. It doesn't have to be kind of theoretical, it's all visual. Okay, so now one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to keep in mind what I'm going to be doing, which I don't normally do, and that's those fusion images in the foreground of something like this. Alright, this is a Prussian blue, so going pretty dark here. Okay, Remember, I'm going darker than I normally would because of those fusion impression ideas. Okay. And this looks really plain up here. I would normally add in some more trees, which, I don't know, I still might, but I'm going to stamp those other trees in front of it, so, you know, I'm not sure if I need them in the background. I think they might compete with what's going on, you know, and make it too busy, so I'll just leave it as is for right now. Alright, this is Prussian blue again. Prussian blue is one of the darkest blues I've seen on the market. It's the number 29 Marvy. Marvy doesn't make their Marvy matchable pads anymore, but they just have their blank pads, and you just fill them up with ink. It looks like this, and you can get any re-inker fluid for it and fill it up. If you're someone that, you know, rarely buys re-inkers, then, you know, it might be something that, you know, you wouldn't be interested in, but if it's going to be a color which you're just coloring with, okay, and you're not stamping out imagery with, you can just, you know, you can just buy the re-inker and just bypass the pad itself, and anytime you want to use some of that color, you just kind of squeeze some of it out, and like right here, here's a blueprint sketch. It's really a quite dark memento ink. You can just put a little down like that, sop it up in whatever applicator you're using, and you just apply it on like that, right? So who needs the pad for that? You don't really need it. You can just save your money. I don't know, maybe buy more colors or something like that instead of just buying the pad and re-inker. You know, you can get a lot of colors in re-inker form. Like I said, if you're not doing impressions with that given color, you really don't need the pad. You can just utilize the color of ink, and you get a lot of ink in those re-inker bottles, more than what would be in the pad. Pads are convenient though, that's for sure. You can just kind of grab it and dab in there, you know, instead of taking a little eyedropper, you know, and stuff, and utilizing it like that, but it's really not too much trouble at all. Alright, that blueprint sketch is great. I don't have the pad for that blueprint sketch, I just have the re-inker. Recently, when I purchased a lot of new colors, the ones that I had pads for, I did buy some re-inkers, but the ones that I didn't already have a pad for, I just, you know, bypassed the pad and just bought the re-inker. Alright, so I'm a consumer, just like anyone else. So, that being said, value, you know, is important to me. Okay, that's that blueprint sketch. I was concentrating because that's such a dark color to work with. Alright, we're going back to black. I'm just utilizing the same tip right here, too, and I haven't changed my applicator that I'm using, except, you know, that paper towel, just to give an example of that. Okay, adding this down, kind of creating that strong vignette, especially for what I'm going to do or try or attempt. I mean, it's not going to be a hard attempt, it's just a matter of, I have no idea what it's going to look like. Either it's going to look good or weird or whatever. But that's the nature of kind of experimentation, right? I don't know what we're going to get exactly. Well, I don't know. With me, with most of my scenes, I don't know what I'm going to get exactly, but you know, I might have kind of a somewhat of an idea. But on this one right here, I really don't know. It's because there's so much happening with the impressions themselves. There's so much, so many variables, the way it stamps out. I just don't know what the impressions are going to look like with that type of fusion ink methodology. Okay, you can see I'm getting pretty dark up here on the top surface. I think that's about right now. All right. Okay, so let's go in here. Before I stamp my impressions out on here, I think I'm going to add in my little special effect type of things that I do with the gel pen, and maybe with some pigment ink too. Not the pigment ink that I'm going to use in the impressions, but you know, just a basic one. The brilliance dries really fast on the surfaces, so it's a little bit of a different type of pigment ink than most other ones. It really has some other type of binder in it. Okay, so I'm going around and I'm just highlighting some areas. I'm just kind of going in and kind of reclaiming some of the lighter areas on these objects that have been lost because I've colored in. Now, I just find it easier to go back in and reintroduce some of this color than to have really taken my time working around these, you know, things like rocks in the water. I mean, some of them can be fairly small. I just think it's easier just to go back in and reclaim those forms with something like that. And I think it looks good. You know, it looks like snow-covered rocks, you know, within the brook here. See this little top portion of this rock right here where it's collected some of that snow on top. So I can just kind of reiterate it. See this top portion right here? I can just go in here and put some of this white back into that. It's like a little, I don't know, bluff of snow, maybe. It's kind of really putting light back into, I wouldn't say dark, but a darker area, okay? And this is, I have a feeling it'll look kind of weird, but, you know, I'm going to be putting in other types of imagery into here, so it's looking really textural right now, but, you know, the whole thing will be quite textured, so everything should blend in from that standpoint. Alright, so you see those little things like that? Doesn't that look like a little snowy kind of passageway up there? And, okay, let's see. So things like this, you know, you can see I've drawn into the design itself those lighter areas. I've just darkened them out. It's hard to see, but see these two little rocks right here? They're lighter on the design, so I'm just kind of reclaiming it like that on the top portion of them. Okay, see that right there? Kind of creates this little passageway of kind of illuminated rocks. Okay, so on this chapel up here, let's have some fun with that. You can really get you know, some snow built up on the top like this if you want. Okay. And then, let's put some snow on these little tufts of frozen grass or whatever it might be, bushes, down here. Right? Because if there's snow on the top of the roof, it stands to reason that there'd be some snow down here as well. Some trees in here. Little frozen grass or something like that in the terrain. That's the first time I've ever done that before. I think it looks pretty decent. This is a Uniball Signo pen, S-I-G-N-O. That's the type of white pen this is. Look at that. I've been inspired by several people on the Facebook group that really utilize their kind of white pen really nicely. And I don't know, I've always done dots for the most part. But when I see some people's scenes where they really utilize that in real gestural ways and everything like that, I thought, hey, that looks really good. I need to start doing that. So, believe me, I learn from all of you as well. And inspired by all of you. Some people use the stamps in a lot of the same techniques that I do, but it looks completely different. They've added their own kind of touch to it. And that's, you know, really awesome to see where things kind of go. And it's one of those things in scenic stamping, you can really get kind of this opportunity for a really distinct style, all your own. And it can happen very quickly. I've seen people that are very new to scenic stamping, and you know, they kind of might be following some lessons, you know, in the beginning, but soon after, it's, you know, they really, they see things differently, and they take it in their own direction according to their own kind of aesthetics, you know, preferences and whatnot, and it's really interesting to see different media being used. There are different color schemes, different sources of light, but also, just like a person's signature and handwriting is something all their own and very distinct from everyone else's, so can their application of media, be it whatever types it is, and all kinds of different looks kind of resulting from it. Okay, so I am doing things a little bit differently on this one. I think I've found kind of a new kind of process right here. I'm kind of applying some cross-hatching that well, it's not really, I guess it's hatching. I'm not really doing cross-hatching, but that's what's new about this one. So anytime I go into a scene where I'm kind of not really thinking about any kind of real definitive result and true experimentation, sometimes I find different touches in my own process. Alright, so kind of adding that on. Why not? I'm getting real sketchy with this pen right here. Some people's use of gel pens, this one person on a Facebook group, I'm telling you, it looks like fabric to me or something. It is really cool. It doesn't even look two-dimensional, it looks three-dimensional. And I have no idea how they're doing it. They couldn't describe it to me, but it's like my things. Some people say, I need to be able to see, you know, what you did, rather than kind of describe. Okay, so anyways, that was really fun. That really added kind of a new element to this image right here, I think. And making it dark allowed for the potential of all these little things like that. So, like that right here. I don't know, it made for a more, I don't know, textured surface, that's for sure. Okay, so let's add in a couple other images. I pulled out some other images that I might want to use with it. I don't know if I was going to use it or not. I really like this kind of craggy image right here. I'm going to put it behind some of these areas right in here. I have it going on in the background over here, kind of this leafless little bush. But this is adding some additional forms, bringing maybe depth and continuity into the scene. See that right there? See how that kind of relates to that one and that one, which are inherent in the design itself. Okay, and let's add another one I'll just block it like that, and maybe I'll just use a smaller portion of it, like that. This is all the masking you'll need. Just a ripped paper towel, but see how that adds in like that? Yeah, I'll just leave that on for right now. Okay, so I've added these little bushes right here. If you want to do have some fun, you can kind of add a little bit of a snow or ice or whatever. It could just be a reflection as well to some of those branches. Okay. Anyways, you can see those little hatches I put in there. This one's, I can't really put it on these ones. Maybe on that little piece right there, but this is, for the most part, it's dark against light. This is dark against dark, so those little white little highlights stand out in that area. Okay, so that is a lot of fun. So far, so good. I don't know, but I haven't gotten to the main thing here yet. I'm not really worried about it, but yeah, I don't know. Because this is kind of a different process right here. I really don't know what's going to come out, and I don't want to kind of have this obtrusive looking, mistake of an impression right here. I don't think it's going to get to that, but we'll see. Okay, so Brilliance pad. And I'm going to use my black re-inker fluid. I don't see it on my desk here. I think I packed all of my black re-inker fluids away from my demonstrations that I was doing at the different shows. Okay, I need to go get another re-inker fluid. Okay. Black Marvy re-inker fluid, okay? Doesn't have to be brand specific, just black dye-based ink. I think, I don't know. I mean, maybe you can use other types of inks, but I'm going with that for right now. Alright, this is a Brilliance white pigment ink, okay? The reason why I'm using Brilliance is because I just don't think that any other type of white pigment ink will dry on glossy cardstock. I don't know, you can heat set it. I just don't think that's going to do it. I mean, you can certainly emboss. You can do your images all in one tone, or, I don't know, can you get multi-colored? I guess you can use different types of embossing powder. You can kind of ink one of these up and go with some white and some black, maybe? I don't know. I don't know what that would look like. I don't think I've seen that done before. It's probably been done before, but I just haven't seen it. Too many kind of fusion colors. Okay, so that is that. Now we're not going to stamp that, and here's where the fusion part of that comes into play. Okay, so black re-inker fluid. Get a pretty decent amount, okay? Don't use a puddle of it or anything like that, but maybe a small puddle. Okay, oh, I forgot what I was going to do. I was going to add in some kind of misty thing. You have to kind of lay down everything that you're going to be doing in here before you do these impressions, because those ones are going to take a little bit of time to dry. So this is just a regular Hero Hues Unicorn White, okay? Just your basic ink. This isn't the Brilliance here. So I'm going to add kind of this, kind of the misty type of feel to this scene. Let me use a softer part of this. I've been using that same part right there for a while. Or can I? Okay, that's fine. Let me just see if you can see. See as I apply this down here in the water, see how it's kind of adding kind of that foggy, misty feel to it, just by putting in a kind of a light application of it. It's almost like you're dry brushing this into the scene. So you can add it around your church too in the background. It's like this kind of mystical, magical haze that's in the background, like so. On the water's surface like this, coming off of the brook. See that right down there? So it's kind of fun. Well, it's definitely fun. It's watching this kind of transformation of, where we're working on objects, but it represents the space in between the objects because you have this suspended moisture in the air being illuminated, in this case by probably moonlight or whatever. So what you're saying is that there's something in between you and those objects that's being illuminated by whatever light that you have in that scene. Does it seem like that? It has a different feel to it, I think. It's different kind of emotional quality too when you kind of add this little haze into the mix like so. I think it looks kind of magical. Okay, so let's see, this brilliance is probably kind of drying on here, so let's add a little bit more to the stamp here. And okay, I have a little sponge ready to go from doing this before, I don't know, like 2 weeks ago or something. Sop it up like so. This is your applicator now. Now naturally we can't take this and, take a stamp pad and go right in there with that, like pad to stamp. It would infect this pad with all that pigment ink, so you have to have some other form of applicator. Okay, alright, let me see. This is going, you have to kind of plan ahead a little bit. So see, this area out here is going to be dark, so maybe this tree will leave it kind of lighter, and maybe these ones in here will be darker, so it'll be darker and then lighter right over here. So darker form of this tree, so I'm just adding some of this tone to it. I don't want to just have it stark, dark and then all white or anything like that. I'll just apply a little bit more on that side and have kind of a lighter version over here. This is where there's so many variables. It depends how much ink is on there from each one of the types of inks as to how this will stamp out. I don't have a lot of control over it, but I practiced with it at the different conventions that I went to. I don't know, when you're sitting there stamping for 8 hours or something like that, there's plenty of time to experiment, and I wanted to show a lot of people this process as well, and some of the results, and kind of just how fun it is. But it is still kind of a work in progress as far as a technique goes for me. Okay, so this is pigment ink now, and it's kind of a thicker ink, Pigment ink's kind of like paint to me, so I really want this to transfer over. If I pull it off too soon, sometimes it works like a vacuum, and I removed a lot of the ink that I wanted to transfer to the surface. It just kind of comes up like this vacuum process. Okay, there we go. So it's a little bit lighter over there, this looks weird when you first do it. You have to have a few other images in here for it to kind of make sense, is what I forgot to say. I kind of forgot about it myself. But it does look weird because it's the only thing addressed in that kind of technique right there. Okay, so that looks okay, but and now you have to clean in between every one of your impressions because you have black on there and you're going to be inking up with that white pigment ink again. You need all of this off. Okay, so that being said, maybe I need to go a little bit lighter down below here too. This is all dark right here. Now that's going to dry lighter too, so it'll look a little bit different than that. But let's try that again over here. Maybe I won't go with too many more impressions of it, because this is just a quarter-size card. So Alright, so let's use this side right here. Ink up more than you think you're going to need. Okay, so that'll be like that. And let me ink up this other tree a little bit more, just so I don't stamp over too far and think, oh my god, I didn't ink that one up enough. You know, so it comes out blank on the edge right there, or edge over here. Alright, so this is going to go in here, like so. Alright, let's use a little bit less black on this one, I think. And you have to kind of figure it out. Okay, this one right here, we'll use a little bit more ink on this tree, I think. And we'll keep this impression a little bit lighter in terms of white. See, I haven't applied too much of this over here. I've left a lot of this side area white. Did I do that the right way? I think I did it the wrong way. I think this one was supposed to be lighter. Let's just go with it. See, I get confused, you know, I flipped it around like that. Or actually, I wasn't going to stamp very much of that one, huh? Okay, so... Alright. How long have I been doing this for? I still don't know the reverse. You know, when you're inking it up, and then when you're stamping it out. I guess, like, I don't know, whatever it is. 25, 30 years isn't long enough to figure that out, maybe, for me. Okay. Alright, I'm just going to let that set there. I think I'll be using this tree right here. I really like this tree used in the process right here to kind of contrast against the full pines. Okay, ooh, that one's really light. Oh, yeah. I need to make it kind of darker in here. So that really came out very light. It's going to be layered. Okay, I'm just starting to remember this now, too. I use the VersaFine black in my foreground imagery. Okay, so it's layered. This is what... See, I've already kind of forgotten this whole process right here, so some of the same notions come to mind whenever I'm doing this now. It's like, oh yeah, it stamps out really light, so you kind of contrast it against darker foreground imagery. Okay, so that being said, let's go over to our VersaFine black, okay? This is where it gets kind of weird too, because if I stamp this VersaFine black right in the foreground here, for these, another layer of tree imagery, as this dries, sometimes that background comes through quite a bit, actually. Okay, so I've stamped this a little bit lower and offset. Okay, I'm not trying to, you know, just stamp over my other images. I want this layered in there to create extra depth. Alright, so it's stamping pigment ink into pigment ink. So the VersaFine's pretty dark though, and pretty thick, so you can just stamp it right on in there like that. See how dark that is? Okay. Now these trees over here are quite dark, but as we sit here, do you see that frosty kind of finish to them? It's drying, so it's drying lighter than what it will look. It'll look a lot lighter when it's dry. Okay. All right. I'm trying to offset this enough to where I'm not just covering over my first impressions. Okay. All right. So just using, I don't know, the top half of the image. Okay, we have that right there. Alright, I have Versify, and a lot of times I just stamp my stamps off like that, but since I have the Versifying on there, good idea to clean it off pretty good. Okay, so let's get in here, and here's this leafless tree, and let's put this one let's put it around right here. Okay, see that right there? It's looking really dimensional in here now, isn't it? Let's go with another one over here. Or two, maybe, I don't know. Come around about like so. Those misty fusion images, I really like them, but they need to kind of have a contrast against kind of more of a crisp impression, foreground impression, for them to be really kind of effective, I think, or more effective. Okay, so you see that right there? So that looks like a pretty good foreground right here. And there's more depth in that foreground having those images within that pigment ink kind of application, I feel. Okay, let's go with a couple other things, elements within this piece. I've just stamped this out, and I think something that will be nice and effective will have that same kind of form, but in the background, okay? So I'm thinking about the smaller version of this tree. This is how I store my images right here, so I keep all those trees together right here, the small, medium, and large version. Okay, and by the way, I'm using tack and peel on my acrylic blocks, allowing me to temporarily affix my unmounted rubber stamps to it. Remember, these aren't clear stamps, so they don't have inherently that kind of sticky property to them, clingy property. Alright, so this is small pine, leafless pine small, so I'm going to wipe off some of this bottom portion of it. Kind of with a dry paper towel, but maybe I'll take off some of the with a wet as well. And what I'm doing here is I'm going to try to create this transition from a lighter tree up here, and it'll just kind of disappear into the darkness down below. Alright, and maybe I'll mask as well. Working with a pretty small format here for this scene, just in terms of how many images I'm actually using, which is quite a few. Okay. Okay, so see that tree in the background, see how cool that is, and light on, dark. And see, it's a little bit lighter up here, and then it transitions out there because I've kind of transitioned it in terms of wiping off some of the ink off of it. Let's go for a couple more of those in the background as well. Kind of the lower you stamp an image, spatially it makes the object closer to us in terms of Western perspective, okay, the way we use that. Okay, so that right back there. I don't know, maybe you can use another one over here just to kind of balance things off a little bit. Maybe I'll just use the small, tip of it to create kind of a smaller tree over here. Okay, yeah, something like that. All right, now let's have some fun. I'm looking around. I got back. I need to find all my demonstration supplies. Here's my toothbrush. My trusty old toothbrush. It's all crusted because I didn't wash it after my last demonstration, so I'm going to go wash this and we're going to utilize this and create a kind of a snowy wonderland with it using the Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White. Alright, my brush is nice and clean here. This is a Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White, which is an opaque watercolor paint. Okay, a lot of calligraphers use it. Every time you open it up, you have to kind of mix it up a little bit. Now, I just did this about a week ago, so it's still in solution, but it'll dry out unless you're using it all the time, and you just kind of add water to it and it's ready to go. Okay, so you just add it and mix it in, get it to the consistency of like a, I don't know, like a thick, I don't know, true 100% maple syrup or something like that, maybe a little bit thicker than that. Okay, and I'm just applying some of this, or soaking up some of it into my brush, and really taking my time to take out the excess so that I don't get any big blobs happening right here, okay? Alright, I think that's sufficient, okay? And let's take a look here. I'll show you where I'm kind of starting this and I'll zoom in. I'll take it from there. Alright, so you're just kind of pulling back on your brush and just kind of flicking it out like that. Okay, let's zoom in. You can see what's happening here. Kind of turn it in the angle that will be the most conducive for your application. And you get these kind of varied marks. It depends how much paint you have on the brush. Sometimes it comes out with like all the same textures. Mine is, it's pretty wet and there's quite a bit of ink in here, so I'm getting both larger balls and smaller ones, which is pretty good to have just in terms of the variation. But sometimes it's harder to control. So see, I'm also doing this kind of off the scene. I'm not doing it right over. If I want to get over here, I'm not going over here like this because it might drip down here. So I'm just turning my card around. But see, I'm always kind of away from the scene. Sometimes it's kind of hard to know which way where it's going to. So okay, I'm getting a lot of variation right here with some. I think I didn't take out maybe the ideal amount, but it's, I don't know, it's working in my favor. As long as I'm kind of careful about this flicking right here. I'm just barely going, I'm not just going flick, I'm going just like a couple hairs at a time, really. I tend to go overboard with this because it's just so much fun to do. I mean, who doesn't want to do splatter painting? It's like we're going back to like kindergarten or something like that and applying some of that. But isn't that fun like that? Look at that textured kind of scene in there now. Look at that glow working in there with the pigment ink. And we have these multi-layered, colored impressions, multi-value impressions, I should say. Different colored impressions as well. I stamped it out in white, but it's a little bit more translucent, so you get some of that blue showing through, so it does merge in with the background, which is probably good. It's probably even better than, say, embossing those in white, which really stand out against that background here. It just kind of merges in there a little bit more. Okay, so I'm going to give this a little bit of time to dry, and it should dry very quickly. The Dr. Martin's Bleed Proof White is a very chalky style of substance, so it does dry very quickly on our cards, so I won't have to wait too long. I can even feel it down here. It feels like, I don't know, like some sort of crust or something like that. Okay. So that is really fun. And I'll add in, I'm thinking like a North Star or something like that in the background, and that should do it. Oh, let me give this a few minutes right here. I want to wait for some of this to dry too. I might add in some little gel pen highlights into these trees here in the foreground, but not sure. But we'll see. Okay, I'm back. I changed my mind. I thought, I think that's kind of dry right now. I think I can just do this right now. Alright, so I'm going to add in, I can use any one of these other dots, but I want to add in this nice kind of North Star right here. And you're saying, what's going to make it the North Star? It's just another dot. I'll show you what I do to that one right there. Okay, now let me see if I can add some gel pen highlights to this. I have to be kind of careful because it is a little bit wet. It's kind of like adding wet gel into wet pigment, so adding this on some of the tree limbs. Some of this, it's like you start rolling up some of that gel into your, some of that pigment ink into your gel pen, so you kind of have to kind of work with that a little bit. Just roll it out like that a little bit. Adding some highlights to both black trees and the white trees, okay? Okay, so let me wait till that dries a little bit more. Okay, I'm back. I just took a little bit of a break here, and I think I shouldn't have to worry about those versifying images quite as much right now, but some of the ink has dried with a dull sheen a little bit. I don't know if you can tell or not, but look how textural that is. Isn't that a really fun surface? Looks kind of crazy down here in some of that foreground imagery. Maybe it's just a little bit too busy back in kind of this area for those types of white images in that area. But, I don't know. I think it looks okay. The gel pen definitely shows right through those pigment ink impressions there, so that's not quite so good, but I don't know. A lot of this, you just have to kind of accept with the current media that we have to work with out there these days. I wish there was a really opaque pigment ink pad, that we don't have to use with embossing powders and whatnot to get that real opacity, true opacity. But I don't know. You can just see it as kind of that's the look of it, as far as what we're kind of dealing with now. And I don't think it looks too bad, but see this kind of frosty sheen back here. We lose a lot of the definition of that tree, but just by putting a little bit of a texture back onto some of these branches and whatnot, I think that looks okay. Okay, so Going into it like so. Pulling out some of these trees from the background, hopefully. You can kind of put, I put a little bit of a, kind of a dollop of that white gel right next to the branch where it comes out, and I kind of do that little, that little mark like that to kind of create, hopefully, a nice tapered line quality. And sometimes the snow gets built up a little bit right at the, I don't know, what do you call that, the crux, or right at that joint right there, the meeting of that, the branch and the trunk. Okay, so anyways, drawing that in there like so. Okay, all right, now let's go in and do that little effect with some pigment ink on a Q-tip here, cotton swab, and let's get one of these little stars to kind of glow a little. I was going to do that one right there, but that little dot out, there could be a good North Star too. I'll just put it right next to the cabin. Okay. And I wonder if I can do this. I wonder if I could draw in a star hand and do it. I was talking about kind of creating that little tapered kind of look. Let me see if I can do that here. Okay, so I'm starting out right on that dot right there, and I'll do this little taper. It's important not to just go up and then lift. You kind of have to go like this and then kind of like you're lifting, okay? Okay, and turn it around for my downstroke. It's always kind of these downstrokes, okay? So you have to kind of position it in a way that's going to be conducive for that. Might as well try, I figured. Okay, and then, it's not exactly vertical, but, and I'll try to make these little secondary flares a little bit shorter, okay? So it's just like a little nick. Okay, so there we have it. A little bit too crazy, but we have our pigment ink here, so let me try to soften that up a little bit. Better to wait for it to dry. And it's still a little wet. See, if I apply that down there, here, let me apply it in a couple areas before I get to the star part. Okay, so here's a little bit more of a condensed application of this mist. See that little, see how you can kind of vary? See, there's a line right there. It's not an outline, but it's this separation between this rock and the snow. So I like to kind of vary that definition a little bit more in these areas like this, okay? I don't do it all the time, but in this one it has this kind of mist that's happening within the scene, so kind of this oscillation of crisp and diffused is kind of the thing that I'm trying to establish here. See, like that? Doesn't it have a different feel altogether? And then we can put some back up here by the little chapel. It's like in a soft mist. It's kind of, we're kind of bathing things in this kind of cool light within the piece here. We're saying that the moisture in the air, is being illuminated by that light, and I think it just gives the feeling of this kind of a visually tactile environment. Meaning, if we were in this environment, we'd probably feel that, that mist on our face. So we're working with visuals here, but you're kind of, you know, depicting this kind of kinesthetic element to the piece, and that's where you can really kind of expand your kind of your visual dialogue that's happening within a piece. I see scenes once in a while that, to me, when I look at them, you know, from a sensory perspective, it's almost like I can hear the silence or that environment within their piece, just the way they depicted things. I don't know, there's a stillness a visual stillness to the air, and you can almost kind of get this feeling of, you know, the sensation of you know, the auditory, you know, in a visual piece. And I think that just really is a really fun type of thing. So you see that little glow up there? Didn't that change that? I mean, before it looked kind of harsh, but now it's soft, and it kind of relates to all the other soft elements within the piece. So tactile and just a lot of fun. And I mean, doing this type of thing is really fun. Okay, now if you haven't seen me doing this type of effect before, you have to kind of retain some of the white of your area, and I apply it typically in areas that are light, where light meets dark, okay? And what happens is, to a lot of people that try this, okay, this is not a hard technique. I'm just lightly dabbing on a little bit of ink at a time, okay? Like so. But what happens is, if anyone ever struggles with this, and it's kind of understandable because I know where they're coming from, it's when they have just way too much ink on here. So if it's a precarious thing, it's going to be really wet. It's going to leave this big blotchy thing, right? But if you really take off a lot of the ink, where it's really quite dry, and you're doing this really dry application, it takes you several taps for it to even appear. It's really hard to get any kind of unintentional mark, okay? So it's just a matter of, you know, you have to take the time to get the right consistency on your applicator, okay? I like to have kind of a frayed tip right here. You can see this one right here. I mean, that's not how this comes, you know, out of the pack. You kind of loosen it up and fray it a little bit and smash it down and whatnot. And then it's very easy to work with. Okay, but anyways, there you have it. A very textured Christmas card, I would say. Winter card. Alright. I gotta bend this back this way. I wish I bought 12-point cardstock instead of 10-point, but anyways, I don't know. I think that's a charming little piece. There's certain things that I learned from, like, you know, I don't want to let stuff showing through here. I don't know what it would look like if I sprayed it. I don't know if we'd lose some of that gel, or maybe it would become more distinct, but we have these little areas down in here, and I think this is we've created a decent range of depth in here. I probably could have used a little bit more black on the impression for those background images, a little bit more so. Do I think they enhance the piece? I think so, rather than not having them in there and just having the black. I think it looks pretty good, especially since we've introduced that same type of reverse imagery in the background as well. So I think it generally helps to kind of tie everything together. I don't think just black in here and white in the background, you know, it might not transition as well as having those kind of pigment dye-based fusion images in here, you know, as a transitionary element to get in the background like that. I don't know. But I don't know. This, I guess I could have used some darker impressions back here as well. I still could. I could put a dark pine tree in here or something to create a little bit more. Okay, let me do that. I talked myself into it. All these concluding kind of statements, you know, that I make in these videos, and I make too many of them when I think, okay, I'm talking too much about what could be done. Maybe I just need to add that in there. Okay, so I'm just going to add this into the VersaFine and kind of blotting some of these off. We'll see if we can kind of create some transitioning types of imagery in the background as well. So we have light and dark in the foreground. My theory is right here, in terms of my application, is to create a little foreground and background within this space. Okay. So we have dark and light in the foreground, well, dark and light in the background. Okay. Alright, let me try something. I'm going to blot that off and see if I can get a lighter impression of it over here. Okay, so I have some trees back in there. I think that looks pretty good. What do you think? It kind of added a little crisp element right back in there as well. I don't know if it looks too busy. I don't know. It's never ending, isn't it? Okay, let me see. It's never ending in terms of the things that you can do. It's not never ending in terms of the things you have to do. But the options are always there, which is the fun type of thing about it. Okay, so anyways. Additional forms back there. It could probably use a little bit of extra pigment ink now, going over some of those areas, but I'm not going to do that now. I might do that later after this dries. I'm going to have to really give, since I'm not in Arizona doing that demonstration anymore from a few weeks ago, we'll have to really wait for this to dry out here where I am in California. I think overnight should be sufficient in terms of this drying, but and then I'll apply some more of the pigment ink mist right at the base of these trees just to kind of tie that all in there. But I think it looks pretty good back there, having those crisp impressions back there and having that dark tree kind of right next to that kind of glowing star. I think there's a nice interplay of contrast between crisp and soft, near and far and dark and light right there in that little element right there, and having those crisp little trees right over here look pretty good right next to that kind of lighter little chapel back there, where it's become lighter due to the pigment ink application over the top of it, and kind of drying dye-based inks look a little bit lighter typically when they dry. So okay, so anyways, hope you enjoyed the scene, hope you liked the end result, and thanks so much for watching the video. If you have any questions, drop me a note in the comment section. I don't know how much I'll be able to answer on this one here, because like I said, it is a total experiment as far as so much of what's going on in this scene, and kind of the different aspects of how things look, the difference between it being wet and dry. These darker images right in here are really starting to dry and turn much lighter, but I think that's all a part of the textural kind of a result of this type of combination of inks being used and, the same impressions. Okay, so anyways, thanks again.